Are you hearing me? Oh, yay. Okay. Woohoo. All right. For those of you actually in the church, you may know this, you may not, but I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't hear Russell's wonderful music. I couldn't hear Andrea's announcements. I couldn't hear anything. And on the chat feature, apparently a number of others could not either. So I'm not sure what's going on, but if somebody who has their camera on can give me a thumbs up for sure, if you can hear me now, that would be great. Thank you, Richard and Tricia. Okay. Woo. So, oh yay! Thanks, Joan. So we'll give this a go here, and we'll see what happens. But sadly, everything that's actually happening at the church so far, on my end, I can see fine, but I can't hear. So, just FYI.
Oh yay! Thanks, John. So we'll give this a go here, and we'll see what happens. But sadly, everything's actually happening at the church so far. On my end, I can see fine, but I can't hear.
And what's happening on my end now, audio-wise, just so you know, is that I'm hearing what I'm saying about 30 seconds after I say it. So it's kind of weird. I'm gonna talk and we'll see what happens because there's nothing I can do on this end. So we'll see what happens. Anyway, for what it's worth, my sharing today has to do with transcendence, and about how. Well, first of all, I guess a little bit about what transcendence is. The idea of transcendence is that there is an aspect of our being that transcends our physical, emotional, and mental natures or selves, if you will. And that transcendent part is the divine aspect of us that I refer to as the soul that exists. That's the us, that's the real us, if you will, that exists before we came into this incarnation, that will exist after we leave this incarnation, and so on. And that we can live in lots of different states of consciousness. We can live in primarily a physically oriented consciousness where we're very connected with our body and our body needs and what's happening physically to us and our environment around us. We can live primarily in an emotional consciousness where what affects us most is emotions, and we're hypersensitive to everything. Everything sets us off one way or another into ecstasy or into depression or into anxiety, but we're always emotionally turned up. We can live primarily in a mental consciousness where we everything has to do with thought and beliefs and so on. We can also live kind of just unconscious, which a lot of the world apparently does, not really paying attention to much of anything and have very little awareness of self or others. And then we can live in this soul consciousness where we are awake to the divine, we're awake to God, we're awake to that loving presence in us and in one another, and we can respond to that. And so the transcendence idea is to hold our attention, if you will, above being focused into the emotions, mind, and body. We can be aware of them and participate, but not be focused or attached so much there. And this year, and by the way, if any of you are all of a sudden, if my audio disappears and you can't hear me, if you could give me a thumbs down or something visual so I know, because that'd be great. But this year, if you've never believed before that this world is a polarized dual world that is always having some kind of conflict, this year should have convinced you. This is the weirdest year of my entire life. I'm 69 years old. I have never seen a year like this. I hope I never see another year like this, quite honestly. But I mean, look at externally what's happening everywhere. There's not just a little flu bug going around the United States or going around, Taiwan or going around northern Switzerland. There's this pandemic everywhere you go. It's everywhere. You can't get away from it. It's everywhere. And so we're dealing with that this year. Then there's all these uprisings and protests that turn into riots and violence and stuff in the United States. We have some of our cities look like third world countries now, that are on fire continually and have been for months. It's insane. And so we look out there and think, oh my God, what is happening? And then we have this election that is so contentious, whatever side you're on, if you're on a side, I'm sure you're hoping your side prevails because everything still is, yeah, obviously not totally solved yet, and neither are the congressional seats. So whichever side you're on, you're probably hoping that, that wins and resolves, and that the other side accepts it, and so on. But there's a lot of contention. And right now that's all up in the air too. We don't know. We don't know. We don't know. So this year, one of the things that is happening that is a fair statement, I believe, is we don't know. We don't know what's happening next with the virus. We don't know what's happening next with the election. We don't know what's happening next with the protests. We don't know what's happening next with our country. We don't know what's happening next with the economy. We don't know what's happening next with the world. We don't know, and we don't like not knowing, especially if we're focused into the mind and emotional parts of ourselves. Our minds really want to understand, and that's a good thing. But when they can't understand, because circumstances are such that you cannot know at this moment a certain outcome or a certain direction, the mind gets very unsettled. And when the mind is unsettled, the emotions get very much in turmoil. So my guess is that many of us this year, perhaps right now still, have experienced a lot of emotional disturbance and stress. That in a lot of ways, it's been a very stressful year. And that is kind of leading to my point, is that we have had the luxury in this age of the world, and in our country in particular, we've had the luxury of being able to count on and rely on certain external things as being consistent, and this year that's changing. This year, most of the external stuff you rely, like for example, back in March, right before the lockdown here in Indiana, the idea that I could go to the grocery store anytime I wanted. I could go get a haircut anytime I wanted. I could go have lunch or dinner with my friends anytime I wanted. And all of a sudden, that wasn't so. It's like, wait a minute. This has always been so. My entire life, that's always been so. Now it's not. We've always been susceptible to germs and bugs and colds and flus and whatnot going around. That's always been true. And yet I've always felt personally fairly safe with all that. If I stay fairly healthy and my immune system's fairly good, and I'm, have reasonable hygiene and all that stuff. And suddenly it's like there's no safe place now. You can get it anywhere. And so it's like, oh my God, I can't go here, I can't go there. And so that's not there anymore. We leaned on that wasn't there. We leaned on, now this is, I'm not going to too far into this because it's just too, polarizing, but the point is, for those of us that did trust our government, or those of us that did trust our media to honestly portray what's actually happening in the country, I think we've seen pretty good evidence this year that there's a lot of untrustworthiness going on in those arenas as well. And so it's like, wow, is there anything I can count on? Is there anything I can rely on? Is there anything that's consistent? Is there anything that's really trustworthy? And the answer is absolutely there is. It's just not outside of you. What you can count on is God inside of you, always being present, always being available, always being who you really are. We are each individualized points of expression of who and what God is. That's true. That's still true. That's always true. And if a pandemic wipes out humanity, God forbid, it's still true. If the economy collapses or the economy surges into the greatest prosperity ever, it's still true. The kingdom of God within us is unchanged by the circumstances outside us and around us. And so this transcendence is, how do we live in this higher consciousness? How do we live in this, what I call the soul consciousness, where we are aware of the reality of God's loving and grace and presence within us? We are aware of the presence and loving and grace and mercy of God in the other that we see, every other soul that we see, that we're aware that all living sentient beings are ensouled beings, not just human beings, but my dog, the cats, the birds. There's an element of God that's alive and awakening in all of them. And so this transcendent state is a state in which we can deal with all of the dramas of the world and recognize the ancient wisdom that there's always drama in the world because it's always polarized. It's a dual world. Wherever there's good, there's bad. Wherever there's light, there's dark. Wherever there's life, there's death, and so on. I mean, that's very ancient wisdom in all cultures. And if we haven't really believed that, this year I think is a great training tool to show us that's really true. And that the place that's not polarized, the place that isn't good or bad, light or dark, that isn't caught up in all these dramas, is within us in this place of peace, this inner sanctuary, if you will, or what Unity often calls the Christ light or the indwelling Christ. The Judaism calls the Holy of Holies. We have different names for it, but I'm just calling that the soul in us right now. And as we learn to awaken to who we are as that soul, not just who I am as this guy here, this Steven guy in this body, or these words you hear, the thoughts you hear him sharing. I'm way more than that. And so are you. And when we can learn to live beyond that in the eternal being of ourself, if you will, then things look differently. And yes, things still distress us. It's difficult, to deal with all the restrictions of COVID. It's difficult to worry about friends who get it or us who get it or might get it. It's worrying some about the elections and all of those things. We have plenty to worry about. But and we tend to think, ooh, this is unique. This is a unique thing to us. But if you go back and read spiritual literature from 6,000 years ago, whether it's Hindu or Jewish or any of the old ones, you find that the world has always been stressed. There's always been reason to worry. There's always been hope for peace. There's always been reason to be upset and disappointed. There's always been reasons to be grateful and happy. And there's always been relationships, and relationships are wonderful and sometimes good, and relationships are sometimes very stressful and hurtful. So that's not changed. The basic struggles of living in a dual world, and we all are when we're in a body, the basic struggles of that haven't changed in thousands and thousands of years. The technology has changed, the cultures have changed, but the stressors, if you will, which are also opportunities of learning, those haven't changed. We still have the opportunity to learn to let our fear take over us and just become crazy worry nuts and lock ourselves in our basement or whatever and never come out, or just be stressed all the time and anxious all the time because things are uncertain. Or we can learn to not do that. When that fear arises, we can learn that that's just a response of the body and the emotions, and not focus into that, but focus beyond it, transcend that, back into the peace of our being in God. And from that place of peace and loving in us, then we have the freedom to choose if and how we're going to respond to the conditions around us. Sometimes our soul will want to engage that. It will want to help set something right in the world, if you will, or help make something better, or help comfort someone, or help ease someone's suffering. And those are wonderful things. Sometimes the soul in us will see a situation and go, I need to not engage in that. I need to stay centered and not move into that. That's something that I don't need to be involved in or afflicted by. And it will just play itself out. No matter how involved or how little involved you are in the world's dramas are going to be playing out. And so our part, from my perspective, is number one, to willingly engage the lessons that are ours to do and to take upon ourselves the responsibilities that are ours to carry, but let go of the responsibilities that are not ours to carry. Let go of trying to learn everybody else's lesson for them and make them wake up in the way and in the timing that you wish they would. Let go of that and just focus on ourselves. And second of all, in that, when we're focused into the loving self that we are, that soul self that we are, not the selfish whims of the body, emotions, and mind, not that, but when we're focused into the real true self, then what's present there is also that loving, which is God's essence. And so if we can hold our focus there, then when there's traumas in our life or traumas in the world around us, we have the ability to choose to move into that scenario with that loving, to bring that loving present, if you will. So an example that comes to mind, which may sound like an odd example, but when Jesus was alive in body, walking in Israel many years ago, there was a woman who was about to be stoned to death because she'd been caught in adultery, and that was the rule of the land at the time. And he came upon the people who were about to stone her. And in that moment, he could have just watched. That was the law, after all. They weren't doing anything illegal. That was their spiritual and civil law. He could have just watched that be carried out. He could have just chosen to turn away and leave and not watch it be carried out. But for whatever reason, something in him, and God willing, probably something in us would have too, I hope, but something in him said, what you need to bring into this situation is loving. Notice what he didn't do. What he didn't do was go into that situation and oppose the people who were about to stone her. He didn't do that. He didn't fight them. He didn't grab the rocks out of their hands and start smashing them with it. He didn't oppose them. What he did was go in there with a voice of loving and a presence of loving and ask questions. Why are you stoning her? Because she sinned. And then asking the question, who here hasn't? Which was brought forth a very different dynamic into the people there than was present before he did that. So what he brought forward was this presence of loving and this possibility of peace and resolution. And he didn't push for any of it. He didn't say, don't you dare stone her. He didn't say, go ahead and stone her. He didn't say, run, honey, I'll try to hold him off. He didn't do any of that. He didn't engage in that polarity. He came in the middle with this calm presence of loving that brought greater self-awareness to all those present. And with that greater self-awareness, all of them realized, oh my God, I've done things just as bad as she has. And I certainly wouldn't want to be treated like this. And they all dispersed. And then there was just the woman and Jesus. And he didn't do anything to her. He didn't condemn her. He didn't praise her. He didn't do anything to her. And when she was sobbing and crying and being grateful, all he said is to go and change her life so that she wasn't creating conditions like this anymore for herself. That's what loving does. That's all it does. And so when we can live above and beyond our experiences, experiencing them, but not anchored into them, not allowing them to pull our consciousness into these lower levels, then what we can bring into our experiences is that light of loving and God's grace for ourselves and for the other people in our lives and in our world. We can bring that present where perhaps it might not have been present before, or at least not so fully present. We can do that. But the more we get caught up in our minds, then what will happen is we'll start arguing. Had Jesus been caught up in his mind in that scenario, he would have started going, wait a minute, I don't think this law is right. That's not what I believe. I think we're misapplying the law. And then they would have argued, no, this is the law. This is the law of Moses. And they would have had an argument about the belief systems involved. Had he been focused into his emotions, he would have been very reactive and passionate about, you can't do this. This is horrible. Or, yes, we should do this. I'm all with you. Give me a stone. And gotten all caught up in it. Just like we see happening going on around us in the world right now. Everybody's taking sides. And every side they take is angrily opposed to the other side. That is the nature of polarity. This constant tension and conflict between one side and another. And we can live like that. And certainly we see much of our world living like that. But we don't have to live like that. Those of us who have been exposed to the reality of God, those of us who know something about meditation and prayer and the truth of life, however we've learned it and however we are learning it, and to whatever degree we're awake to it, we have a different opportunity. We have an opportunity to live in its transcendent state, not an airy-fairy one that doesn't recognize the conflicts in the world or the bad things that happen in the world, because there are good and bad things that happen in the world. Not denying that or not recognizing it, seeing it as it is.
not an airy fairy.
But like Jesus, living in a state that's above that. And when we do engage in those scenarios, engaging from that place of loving and connecting to everybody, because I don't know if you realize this, but in that scenario, it's often told, in church stories and whatnot, that he saved this woman from being stoned to death. That's true. But what isn't often told is he saved everybody there, not just her. And that's what loving does. He saved them all from doing that. He saved them all from being attached to something that was less than their potential. He saved them all from doing violence when maybe some of them didn't want to but felt compelled to. He saved them all from yielding to their passions for the ones that did want to do that. He didn't just save her. His presence and his loving clarity saved everybody. And that's what loving does. So we have this opportunity to begin to live in this more soul awareness. And many of us have it because we've done our meditations, we've done our prayers, we've done our study, we've done our fellowship, we've attended church or whatever we do for our spiritual upliftment and education. We've done all that. And then as soon as there's major conflict around us in our life or in the world, particularly if you listen to media 24/7, who likes getting us worked up about all the stuff that's happening in the world, then you get sucked out of that place of peace and loving, and you get caught back up in this drama and feel compelled to fix something or compelled to get away from something. And whenever you feel compelled, pushed or pulled, it's karma, not God. God is free. Karma is bound. So if you feel compelled to do or not to do, then take a look and see if there's a way you can lift your attention a little higher than that, because that is the world of polarity and karma that's pushing and pulling you. You need to be free, a free soul, awake to love, awake to who you are in God and who God is in you and who God is in the other, whether that other is your friend or your adversary, whether that other agrees with you or they're in disagreement with you. You need to wake up to the souls that are present in all these encounters in the world and start responding to the souls as a soul, not as an opponent, not as an adversary, not as somebody who I don't like your personality, I don't like your religion, I don't like your politics, whatever it may be. But this soul in me is the part of me that is God and awake to God. And it knows that the soul in you is no less part of God than me. So I'm not responding to you. My soul, when it's interacting with you, is responding to my God, because you are my God and I am yours in that sense, in the sense that each of us is this individual little unique expression of what God is. And we can live more than we do. Can we live in it 100% of the time? I've never been able to. Maybe you can. God bless you if you can. Show me how. I've never been able to. But with devotion and discipline, I've been able to do that way more often than I used to be able to do it. And it changes everything when you can do that. So what I'm suggesting is not to pretend there aren't disturbing things going on in the world, and not to hide from them, and also not to feel that you have to go out and do battle to fix them. If you feel all that and you want to make those choices, go ahead. But what I'm suggesting is you have the alternative of seeing things as they are without the veils of illusion that want to see things just so that they just fit my narrative and so that they just fit my belief system. Seeing them as they are. And when you do, instead of moving into judgment, instead of moving to one side of that polar spectrum or the other, stay above the spectrum altogether and let the light of your loving shine into both sides, both sides. Do you know what Jesus said? Your Father in heaven makes the rain to shine on the just and the unjust. He causes the sun to shine on the holy and the unholy. Be like your Father in heaven. And that's what I'm trying to talk about, is we can stay in this spiritualized consciousness, this soul consciousness, in our personal relationships with our family and our friends and our neighbors and our employees and employers. We can stay in that focus when we're dealing with situations and dramas in our own life. And we can stay in it when we are engaging the culture and society. And what if the goal is really to stay with God, but as a benefit to that, or a blessing that spills out of that, if you will, or a mercy that overflows from that, what if more people in the world actually did that? What if the people who were protesting, instead of throwing Molotov cocktails and carrying baseball bats and guns, what if they began to do that? What if the people on opposing political sides began to do that? What if people who are dealing with the pandemic began to do that? What if we all began to whatever degree we can, and it takes practice, and it gets easier as we practice more, but we can improve. What if we just more often lived in that soul consciousness, in that state of awareness of God? And from that state of awareness, we held to that state of awareness before we spoke, before we choose to act. It would certainly transform our experience of our life. And in many ways, it would transform the world. We tried, and for years we tried. In the 60s, I was one of these, very, very active political idealistic youth. I was going to make the world a place of glory and peace by the time I was 21. Didn't quite succeed at that, but we really wanted to do that, and so we've tried for years and years and years to change the world by convincing them to believe the way we believe. Hasn't worked. But what does transform the world is when you allow yourself to be transformed into the image and likeness of God. You already are the image, but you may not live as the likeness. So live as the likeness of God and let yourself be transformed. And when transformed beings awake to love, beings awake to God, beings who are at peace in themselves, when those beings have encounters in the world, it is transformative. And even if you only change one life, that's one that wasn't changed before you. And more, there'll be this one, and then this one, and then this one. So I'll just end with this story that I heard. It's an old story, but I heard it from actually an Indian guru many years ago. But it's an old story. You probably heard it. And he was talking about, he was walking along the seashore one day, and all these starfish had washed up onto the shore, and then the tide had gone out, and they were all dying. They were all drying out and dying on the shore. And there were just thousands of them. And there was this young boy who was going up and picking up a starfish and throwing it back out into the waters of the ocean so it could live. And then he'd go and pick up another one and throw it back out. And he said, the man walked over to him. He said, son, what are you doing? He said, well, they're all dying, so I'm picking them up and throwing them back into the ocean so they can live. And the man said, look down the beach. And the boy did. He said, there are thousands, maybe millions of these starfish. You can't possibly save all of them. It doesn't matter. And the boy thought about it, and he looked, and he picked up another one. He said, well, it matters to this one. And then he threw it back into the sea. So every encounter you have, it matters to that one. And if we can come from that place of transcendence in us, we can allow the love that is God to move through us to that person or to that situation. The more we get caught up in mental conflicts, in belief ideologies, in emotional reactiveness, then the more we contribute to the conflict around us and within us, and the more we can stay focused into who we are as soul, the more we can stay above that, and then allow that light to begin to move into all those shadows and bring greater light and greater possibilities into those places. So that's my 2 cents worth today. But the world has definitely shown us, don't rely on it for peace. You can bring peace to it, but you're not going to get peace from it. So thank you for letting me share today. I'm going to turn off my mic now.
But the world showing us. Don't rely on it for peace. We can bring peace to it, but you're not going to get peace. Thank you for letting me share today. I'm going to turn off my mic.
Also, there are several ways that you can support our spiritual home. You can donate button on our website and we're here to today. Putting our hands for prayer. We affirm our divine love through the blesses and all that I have, all that I do, that just a few announcements. On Wednesdays, we have meditation at 12 noon and 7 p.m. on Tuesday. Wednesday at noon, we have our Serenity Alive class on Facebook. Next Sunday, after service, we will be hosting a workshop called Living in Grace and Dignity. And this, one of our members, and along with Chris Brenneman, who is the Parkview Dance Director department from there, they're going to be showing us, helping us understand ways where we can plan and live life issues. Susan, do you want to say anything else? Right. Yes. No, say that. Don't forget. We will have our technical issues worked out, and that will be if you're interested. You can contact Susan Green or the church and get you more information about that. And I think there'll be information on that in our email blast this week, too. All right. Very good. Okay. For closing, let's stand for the prayer for protection. The original version. Yes. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are,